I've got a few more people coming in, so I'll just wait a little. Okay, well, welcome everybody to the very first day of April Poetry Month. And I'm really excited to have this reading. And I'm so thankful for Christine for organizing with me and for Nicole for all her help as well. My name is Kristen Ravel, for those who don't know me. I'm currently teaching English 154 at Rockford University, which is the Introduction to Creative Writing. And in honor of Poetry Month, and in collaboration with Christine and my students, we've decided to turn today, our normal class, into a real poetry reading. So thank you so much for being here and supporting this event. And then we also have a special guest, Colleen Helmbeck, who is our donor for the Colleen Helmbeck Poetry Prize at Rockford University. Thank you so much for being here, Colleen.
Thank you.
And as we go ahead and move forward, I'll kind of give you the layout of the plan for the day. We're going to have a couple student readers from my 154 class read their poems, and then we'll introduce Christine, have her read, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. In terms of Zoom etiquette, if you could just remember to turn your mics off when you're not speaking, because I personally know how distracting that can be, trying to read when you're hearing some outside noises. I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll get started. So our first student reader is Melanie Haben. Melanie's earning her English, Melanie's major is in education, and she's looking forward to teaching middle school English language arts. She'll be sharing her poem, The Yellow Evolution. Melanie, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, sorry. So the title, like Professor Ravel said, it's The Yellow Evolution. Dear society, colors can impact, like the color of sobriety, or when a yellow bee attacks. Stimulate the nerve to numb the pain. Yellow flowers I conserve, keep me away from vain. In the middle of July, behind a smile, keep my eyes dry just for a while. So in class, we were doing mediations on color, and I decided to do the color yellow. This poem can really relate to anyone, like it does for me. I kind of use the color yellow as a symbolization of heightened feelings. And I went through a hard time about 2 years ago in the middle of July around the summertime. And the color makes me happy, but you can always hide your true feelings behind a smile. And I kind of wanted to incorporate that into this poem.
Thank you so much for sharing your poem, Melanie. We really appreciate you. Our next student reader, Avon, is a freshman musical theater and dance double major from Georgia. He's recently getting into writing more frequently and is excited to share his work with you all. I wanted to also mention Avon's a student editor for Rockford University's literary and art magazine, Fingerprints. So.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. My name's Avon, and this is a rondeau I wrote about a mountain and kind of the changing of seasons. So, on the mountain's plateau splayed the fallen snow, the frozen ice melting in the sun's glow. Trees bent, bowing to a faded sacrament, understanding the significance of the water's glint. Heaven and earth scattered in the meadow. Give way to the dead, for they lead the show. They carry winter's charmer in the procession slow. The sea sends a breeze to assuage its despondence on the mountain's plateau. As the last of Wintroot's leaves, new life may grow, and the passing is latched on wings of a crow. The season is changing and spring is adamant, but the plants don't bloom, keeping a grasp on their abstinence. They wail for what they've lost as their core becomes hollow on the mountain's plateau. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your phone. I love both of those. I was going to go ahead and talk about a little bit about Christine. I feel like a lot of my students already know her. A lot of the folks here already know her, but we'll do a formal introduction just because. So Christine graduated from Rockford University, then Rockford College in 1979. She currently holds the honor of being the first official poet laureate of Rockford University. Rockford, Illinois. She's published over 600 poems and 9 books of poetry, her most recent book being Wild Fruitation, Sonnets, Spells, and Other Incarnations. Through our Facebook messaging and chats on the phone, I've learned, unsurprisingly, that Christine also has a life beyond poetry and writing. For instance, she loves gardening and traveling and has various past experiences as a teacher and mentor. As we planned this reading together, it became clear to me what a caring and committed soul she has. And I'm honored to be able to introduce her today for this reading on the opening day of Poetry Month. Thank you, Christine.
Time to get started now? Because you had mentioned something about Colleen possibly saying something.
No, thank you.
Oh.
I'm glad to see you here, Chris.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you. Well, when thinking about what to do for this first wonderful day of National Poetry Month, I was thrilled to be part of Rockford University, and it's so fitting because that's where I got my MAT degree in 1979, which oddly had nothing to do with poetry whatsoever. It was about the history of the American West. That kind of tells you that sometimes the path to poetry is circuitous, and that's how mine has been. It's been in the background, kind of going around in circles for about 50 years or so. So what is a poet laureate? Well, in Illinois, at least in Rockford, Illinois, this was an applied for position. It wasn't just something that was granted by someone who knew you. You had to go through quite a strenuous process, a very strenuous process to get there. And I believe you did see part of my interview that was edited, so you know what I'm talking about. I was surprised that I got it. I'm 72 years old. I thought somebody younger would get it. Someone who was out there more frequently than I am might get it. But what I realized is that I kind of gone through all those roles already and had reached a certain maturity, and what they called it was a breadth and depth. So that's what I hope to bring with today's reading. What do poets do? I'm trying to pick some basic things that poets do that I hope will be inspiring to you. Poets use language in a unique and original way. And you know what? Sometimes people forget that. It's not just prose written down the page. It needs to be unique and different in some way. Poets enjoy using comparisons and metaphors, and that is not necessarily an easy thing to do. So I thought I would begin this reading with, because it is Poetry Month, a poem about poetry. It's called Poetry Is. I've written it within the last year or so. And it's a series of, well, you'll see, metaphors and comparisons about what poetry is. And maybe there's some phrases in it that during the Q&A you might want to ask about. So, poetry is. Poetry is the scrapbook of the heart, the blueprint of the soul, the labyrinth of the mind, the path of perception, the inventory of love in all its forms. Poetry is the antidote for shallowness, the remedy for stagnation, the balm for loss, the clarified moment of memory, the ruthless recollection transformed. Poetry is the senses salted, the lens magnified, the thought shimmered and ignited, the touch translated, taste untampered, tapped and untempered feeling. Poetry is meticulous metaphor, synesthetic symbiology, the reckoning and redemption, the stones of sculpted stanzas that lead beyond the temple of turmoil to the sanctuary where a garden bench awaits you, perhaps a chalice of wine, communion of meaning gleaned, shared among the likewise spirits. Thank you. So what do poets do? Poets are keen observers of the world around them and the world within themselves. They sometimes combine those two worlds in thoughtful and surprising ways. Most of us have had animals that we've cherished in our lives. Maybe they were wild animals, maybe they were pets. This one happens to be about pets. And it's called The Gift the Dream Gave. One night after a day of mourning the passing of my most elegant and funny cat, the one whose heart was bound to mine, a healing came in the form of a dream. First, a lush green grass plain surrounded by evergreens and hardwoods. Then one by one, all the pets I've ever had came out of the woods and ran and played on their deep green sea of grass. Shylock, my little red mare, the dogs, Pepper, Cosmo, and Maggie the Saint, and then all the cats, Narcissus, Goldman, Merkel, Chaplain, Maybe Cat, Spot, Binky, all the rest. And finally, my dearest, most recent loss, Marmoset, the magic cat who loved French songs and slept with her paws folded around my palms, greeted me the same way she did each morning with her joie de vivre and bright golden eyes. Marmoset, who broke my heart with her suffering. It was a sunny, windy day. They were happy. If heaven exists, I like to think the animals will greet us before we cross the green into entering the forest. Thank you. I didn't realize this for a long time. It took me many, many years to realize this, because I think I was becoming a poet and living the life of poetry without actually realizing it for a long time. So poets seem to be in the thick of other people are somehow. You know what I'm saying? And we witness things somehow that many people don't even see. And so, even though I'm an old lady now, you would not believe this, but I actually went to Woodstock. I was, I think, 19 when I went to Woodstock. It took me 40 years to write about that experience. And I think about William Wordsworth, who said, and I think I wrote it down to quote it correctly, I did. He said, poetry is spontaneous and it's an overflowing of feeling, but it takes its emotion recollected in tranquility. And the older and more mature I get as a poet, the more that means something to me. So this is called Woodstock, 40 years later. We wandered from flimsy free love fantasies, far from our deluded Dionysian debacle, far from the merry pranksters and paisley buses, so far from the magical mystery tour, slapped into the slippery, muddy slopes of real life. Oh, but what a rite of passage, that great white walrus of Woodstock. What I remember most was rain and mud, walking in the muck uphill, pilgrims flocking onward for a glimpse of freshly minted saints and sirens, the major arcana of musicians, ghosts of Woodstock's past. Pilgrims loved their martyrs, though we didn't know it then, walking the counterculture Via Dolorosa barefoot, lured and charmed by our branded saints and sirens. But after the siren songs and freak rains sent us blowing in the wind, where's home? What happens after such a grand Chautauqua? Where do revelers of revival and revision go? Some wandered the desert, foraging every new manna, delivered by ever darkening gods, every new high, finally reaching ecstasy and often death. Some stayed in communes like promiscuous monks, practicing vegetarianism and free love. Some became able to do much of nothing. Gurus grew like grapes, mantras spiraled like vines. Some went to Vietnam, Canada, or jail. Some marched until Vietnam collapsed. Most of us moved on into a changed world and tried to make our way in it. So of course, with the advent of COVID, I've been writing a number of poems about that. And this is one of the first ones I wrote. And it was before we all were asked to start wearing masks. So I think it has a moment of premonition in it, even though the moment comes by looking at a cardinal of all things, which are sort of spiritual birds to begin with. And so I want to share it with you, an early poem written in COVID. It's called Harbinger. Like leaves falling from trees out of season, fingerlings of hope land in a world sheltered in place, flutters of surprise. A week into it, and this is only a week into it, by the way, snow, a world through windows, and a pair of cardinals at each one. Throughout the day, they greet me. The male, full of fervor and focus, seems to stare me straight in the eyes, seems to sense that all is amiss. Others speak of dolphins leaping in canals now empty, maybe true, maybe false. The clearer skies over ravaged countries, manatees making contact, pets more tender and loving. Today, the cardinals follow me. It is said they are angels, bearers of good news, spirits of the dead watching over us, everlasting blood of redemption. That's actually one of their meanings, by the way. Whatever happens, I will never forget the red cape and the black mask, sleek harbinger perched on a bare tree. For me, the path of poetry has included a great deal of adventure. I like to travel all over the world, and I don't like to go in groups. I like to just go with a friend or two or my husband and sort of discover what there is to discover all on my own. I don't want anyone telling me what I'm supposed to be looking at. And so this is called At the Sacred Cliffs of Kauai. I hope that's not me because I don't have any reason to have anything ringing here. Okay. Can you all hear me okay just the same? All right. This is called At the Sacred Cliffs of Kauai. And it matters to me because at the time I didn't think anything could get any worse. And now years later, I realize, a few years later, things certainly could get worse. No matter how wide nor deep today's grief, remember, the world is wider and deeper. When you feel it shrinking, know, new earth still forms, volcanic fire on the sea. There may come a time when things won't get better, but not today, with its cleansing rain, its hope of rainbows, its change of plans. Even the planets retrograde and don't fall from their orbits. In a million years, the Kauai cliffs will be nothing but coral reefs. But see how they do nothing to speed their erosion? Be like that. Stand hard in your grief and let the elements pound your ribs. Carve out something solid, a jagged beauty unsurpassed, pierced and pointed to the sacred. I'm checking everything down here to see that this couldn't possibly be me, and it isn't.
Yeah, I'm double checking. I think we have everybody on mute. Sounds like it stopped now.
Maybe I'll mute myself and then try again. What do you think?
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay. No, it's not me.
Christine, I don't hear the ringing anymore, and it looks like you're on mute now. So I wonder if it is coming from your home computer.
Now I'm putting it's back on. I just unmuted it.
Yeah, I don't hear it when you mute, but I do hear it when you unmute.
I wonder if you have an alarm in the background of your computer or calendar notification or anything.
I actually don't hear it now, so it might have gone away.
Right. So poets also speak for social injustice. Oh, excuse me. We experiment with form, and I know that you did the trio of the Gardner poem, and I want to read one other trio that was a trio of sonnets, and I want to take us far away to a place called Sedona, Arizona. And so this is a sonnet triptych. A rainbow slivers over Cathedral Rock here in Sedona, where molecules spin, buzz up your spine, tingle your scalp, and knock at the portal of your third high. Within each breath you take upon this vortex, meditations amidst red towers cleanse and sharpen your cerebral cortex. Then you might decide to pass the hours communing with the great benevolence. And if the ghost of Edward Abbey flies as a vulture, or if you have the sense that a restless spirit from Jerome cries in the lightning of an afternoon monsoon, breathe in, be one with each sacred ruin. With each sacred ruin and cave dwelling, with each spiral and divine design, with each hovering rock and cloud swelling, with every desolate abandoned mine, with every crystal misguided or not, with every hummingbird and mountain quail, with the rattlesnake tied neatly in a knot, behind the cactus and the wind's wail, over spires through never-ending canyons, along green rivers winding, and sagebrush rippling by its side. Sweet smell of pinions high upon the great red rocks, and the green lush surprise near the rim of clouds. Then the sun, like 1,000 painted ponies on the run. Like 1,000 painted ponies, sunset thundered through the ever-changing sky. The wind, rocks, and spirits and rain all met that night just beneath the moon's cat eye. Here's what the wind said, keep moving. The great rock shouted, there's always more. And the dime store psychic said, keep proving. And the rain whispered, don't close the door. They called to the secret shaman that lives within your heart, the one who remembers the soul of every living thing, who gives this earth its equal space, who numbers herself among the little lizards, desert doves, among every creature that she loves. And I thought, because I know you want to have some time for discussion, I'm going to read a couple of social justice poems, one that's very old and one that is more commemorative. Are you still getting the beat? Are you guys okay? Can you hear me okay? Okay. Nothing down here is telling me to do anything strange. Okay. In 1978, I went to Guatemala and it touched me. And so this is a poem about that place and a young Mayan woman that I met. They tell me you have been ravaged, Mayan mother, small bones crushed by gorillas and earthquakes. Your small son wears the black band over the sleeve of the perfect shirt you wove for him in ancient Mayan red. Lake Atitlan is bluer than tears, where sulfur springs are tinged with Mayan blood. Even the poinsettias bleed when no one picks the coffee beans and avocados rot in the jungle. Did they burn your thatched roofs? Do heads of slaughtered chickens still lie beside your novena's candle? Do you pray to Quetzalcoatl, Guadalupe, Castro, or did the earth mercifully swallow you? I swear by the cloth I brought from you, little one, I did not imagine happiness in your black diamond eyes. Your life, 3,000 years rich, was no poorer than mine. Who will buy your chevroned weavings? And then, as poet laureate, one of the things I've had to do is to write commemorative poems, and often they are social justice poems as well. And so this one is called After the Coup, and I wrote it right after January 6th of this year. We hoped for a better year that would fly in like a winter dove, return to our feeders each day, a talisman of healing. We, the people, wept in front of our televisions, our country in chaos, a coup gone awry. We are broken like the windows of our capital, great freedom of the Temple of Freedom, great symbol of the Temple of Freedom. Our souls invaded through once sacred doors. Yet we find hope in the resilience and courage of our elected, returning to their jobs and finally getting it done, despite fear. We search for the eagle soaring high above the clouds of inequity. We raise our collective fists and cry, no more. We seek to uplift each other in these days of tumult and sedition. May we find it in each other. May we someday return to that garden alive again with roses and peace doves, dirt and grit in our hands, ready to begin again as we have always done on the wings of resolution and courage. This feast of Epiphany was a feast of loss, yet there will be wise men and wise women who follow the light, bring us gifts, torches of healing in the too dark night. So I thought I might leave you with that poem unless you'd like one or two more before we get into the discussion. What are your thoughts?
Any strong thoughts? How about an encore, maybe? One more?
For another poet, one of the options I had here is that sometimes poets write about other poets. So I thought I'd read, after viewing Kerouac's original scroll. Some of you may have seen it in Chicago. Like a relic preserved in the catacomb, the long brown scroll unfurls under glass in the darkened room, highlighted by modern lights. On the road stretches, furled at the end like an ancient script. Long before we went to Woodstock, long before we went roaming the world, long before a gypsy violin sang the siren lure to any place but here. Jack, you were typing the keys, manic and filled with the existential joy of leaving and remembering. Looking at the scroll today, I can't help feel we owe you something, Mr. Kerouac. Muse, inspiration, neurotic mama's boy, complicated soul, delirious and desperate. You taught us how to leave and to remember. You showed us how to savor the dark wind, the dark angel of that place between youth and old age, that place you didn't make it to. For those who grew older than we ever thought we would be, leaving doesn't seem so easy. And as another poet said, the tribes have scattered. Leaving seems unkind now, and home fires burn steady, and the treasure chest is full. Still, sometimes we pack our bags again, hit the road, the bridge, the tunnel, leading somewhere new, somewhere else. Like you, we remain misunderstood here, where everyone thinks they own the light, and the light is all there is. But we know it isn't so, don't we, Jack Kerouac? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe one more round of applause or clap emojis, whatever it takes. Thank you so much, Christine.
Okay, you know what I'm gonna try? I'm gonna try muting again and see if that noise goes away.
It almost sounds like it's like a calendar notification reminder, but no idea. We can still hear you though. So I can't hear you speaking, and I also can't hear the ringing now.
We just requested for you to unmute Christine, so hopefully you get a notification. There you go.
Got it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I can hear the ringing, but I can also hear you even though it's ringing. And I'm guessing that's the case for a lot of folks. So we can just move forward with the Q&A.
Okay.
It's COVID times, nothing's going to be perfect, but we can do what we can.
Must be something inside my laptop. I think I told you before, every now and then I have issues and I don't know what it is. So this is the first issue I've had like this though.
I think we talked about it before on the phone where it's like technology almost has its own agency, its own mind of its own that we can't always control. So I understand, especially teaching this semester and last semester. I'm sure you are also familiar. So yeah, we can go ahead and move forward to some Q&A. You can ask questions in chat. You can raise your hand and vocalize them. Whatever, we'll just get some conversation going, get some discussion going.
I got a question. So me and my group last week, we discussed about talking about writer's block, and we wanted to find out if you like how do you get inspired to get out of writer's block, basically?
Well, actually, you're probably not going to like the answer to this question. I don't really have writer's block. What I have is I'm very disciplined and I used to write every single day, no matter how I felt and no matter whether the muse was with me or not. Eventually I burned out. And what I realized, and here's a little secret, is that's because my brain just could not be creative anymore. It was just done being creative for a while. And that was the perfect time to find places to publish, because then the logical part of your mind can look at what's out there for you to send to. You can make a list of things. You can use another part of your brain for a week or two, maybe 3 weeks, depending on how long it takes, to use this other part of your brain. And then that refreshes the creative part, but it also gets your work out there. And the thing about getting your work out there is that helps writer's block. Does that make sense? And because, you know, so then you see your work in print and you go, okay, I can do this again. I mean, it's a sort of synchronistic thing. So I don't call it writer's block. I just call it a little sabbatical from what I'm doing. You know, it's not a block really. It's just that it's time to do something else for a minute. I don't ever feel like, oh my God, I'm never going to write again, if that's what you mean. It's never like that. But that took me a little while to figure out. When I was younger, I couldn't figure it out. It's like, uh-oh, what if I don't write again? But then once I realized I could really use that time to use a different part of my brain. And that's probably how I got 600 poems published. People think, well, how did you ever do that? Well, because I took the time to do it. And in between that time, you know, the brain kind of settled back down and the creative juices got back in. And then often there were the surprises and delights of being recognized for what you were doing. And that helped the process along. That's the best advice I can give you. I'm not one for like, please forgive me for saying this because I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, but I can't write when I'm told to write. Like, you know, I give people all sorts of mini prompts, but I can't do them myself. Isn't that wild? I hope that helped.
We've got a question. I think Mary was next up and then Avon asked one in the chat. So I'll ask that one afterwards. So Mary.
Hi, Christine. Congrats on your role as the first poet laureate of Rockford. That's wonderful. Is she on mute now?
No, can you not
Okay,
hear
now
me?
you're coming through. I couldn't hear you. I was really taken with the nature imagery in your poetry, your reference to Edward Abbey. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the impact of nature on your work, and if there are other environmental writers who've had an impact on you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I don't think I'm above the animals. I mean, I guess I'm a mystic. If I go into the garden and I'm playing with the hummingbird because the hummingbird loves me, or if I get to know something, you know, in nature, I don't consider myself superior to that creature. That creature and I are one, as far as I'm concerned, as my friend David Getchick knows, because we have hummingbirds in our yard that scare people because they come flying at them like torpedoes and things. So part of it is that I just don't feel that I'm above nature in any way, that I'm just part of it. And of course, you know, I think over a period of 50 years of reading and teaching, you just can't help being exposed to a lot of different nature writers. And whoever they are, they influence you in some way. I would say Wendell Berry, for example, really touches my soul. Now and then, but not always. Mary Oliver touches my soul with the nature writing. Those are the two I can think of just right offhand. But then, of course, there are the romantics that I remember reading, and they had more of a mystical approach, I think, to nature and oneness with nature, which I think, in retrospect, I can see now that never left me. I didn't know that then.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And Evan from our class, the one who read his poem, asked in the chat, what was your reaction to learning you got the Poet Laureate position of Rockford?
I was completely and utterly surprised. And the reason is that in the last 5, 6, maybe even 10 years, I have not been as public a poet as I used to be. When I first started out, I had very, very good beginner's luck. I was very, very lucky that way. People paid a lot of attention to me. I was in the Rockford paper all the time, and I have no idea how it happened. It was just one of those things where I got noticed. And then Frank Shear, the late great Frank Shear, offered me a poetry, actually a paid poetry column, if you can imagine that, in Rockford River Times. I mean, that doesn't happen to poets very often. If you're a poet, you know that. And so for probably 20 years, I had, you know, kind of a little, I don't know if I had a following, because I don't know if people actually read my work, but they knew of my work. So, you know, that was, I think, one of the reasons. But I think the other reason that I was surprised is because of my age. You know, I kind of think, well, maybe they would be looking for somebody younger or somebody who had better, clearly, technological skills. And I told them that. I was very upfront about that I had to learn some of these things and, you know, need help with that. Oh, asked to unmute. Oh, so yes, it was very much a surprise. But once I began talking about all the experience I've had with teaching poetry, writing poetry, some of it is very academic, some of it is not academic. I kind of like run the whole gamut of things. Then I think that's one of the reasons I received the award. But the main reason I received the award was because my theme was to uplift Rockford through poetic collaboration. I think there's plenty of dissent and plenty of negative poetry being written, and more power to people who do that. They need to do that. And they may be at an age where that's how they must express themselves. So it's not a put down in any way, but I feel like I've already done that and other things. And so I think they wanted someone with a breadth and depth of poetic understanding.
Thank you.
It looks like Jen has a question, and then I've got a couple questions from students in my DMs as well. So go ahead, Jen, if you're ready.
Hi. Thank you so much, by the way, for some fantastic poetry, just fantastic. And actually, as you were reading your poetry, I was kind of wondering if you could speak a little bit about your revision process. Do you have a revision process? How do you do it? Do you
Yes.
put it away or do you, all right?
Well, when I first started out, I was misguided by well-meaning instructors who felt that the best way to teach people how to write poetry was reductively. Am I making sense? In other words, take as much out of it as you possibly can and make it as simple and imagistic as possible. Not. Those days are gone. And what often happens when you write poetry like that is you end up with really stilted, unnatural, sticky poetry. So I stopped revising like that. It was just a point where I thought, this isn't me, this isn't how I write. And then it helped at the Vermont Writers Program that I worked with the late Linda Hall. She's passed away now, but her poetry was much more jazzy, much more flowing, much more lyrical, impossible to understand, but wonderful. And so I kind of, I got a lot from that. I got a lot from the idea that you can have longer lyrical lines, that poetry can do more than one thing at once, that in fact, the most virtuoso poetry should do more than one thing at once. So once I began realizing that, the revision process became more not reductive, but adding to things or thinking, what if I made this into a 3-sonnet trio rather than write down the page a little prose piece. So it became, the revision process became more of how much better can this poem be, not necessarily by taking away from it, but what does it really need to say? And then of course, taking out things that don't need to be said is hard. But the more I wrote, the easier it got to write it right the first few times. I revise much less now than I did 30 or 40 years ago. And the way I would describe it is it's like a person who learns how to use watercolor. Well, at first it might be really awkward and not get there. Well, by the time you get to the 50th watercolor, it's starting to get there, maybe the first or second time. And so the revision process has become less for me, if that makes any sense. The other thing that I notice is if I do revise, which I still do quite a bit, it's often on the basis of form. So I'm looking at a free verse poem and it looks like a square box and it's kind of ugly and it's kind of boring to me. And I think, well, what if this were a sonnet? Would it read better? Would it be more interesting? Could I make it into a sonnet? And I often make it into a sonnet. And so in fact, my last book, because I didn't used to write that many sonnets at all, but my last book is actually Wild Fruition, Sonnets, Spells, and Other Incantations, because after kind of, rediscovering the sonnet, I learned that, especially if you Americanize it and don't try to make it sound like Elizabethan, and don't try to end stop all the lines, you can do things with it that you can't do with other poems because it makes you stick with 14 lines and end with some sort of an epiphany. And I found that was a very satisfying way to write. So I revised a lot of things that way. I hope that helps. Oh, you're muted, so, okay.
Thank you, Christine.
Sorry. Thank you. That was
that help?
fabulous. Yeah, that was fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions from students in the DM. So May in our class had a kind of a 2-part question. They might be related questions. The first part was, is there ever any topics or subjects in your poetry that you kind of don't write about or haven't written about? And then the follow-up question was, do you think it's important for poets to write about and engage with current events?
There probably isn't anything I've never written about. there are things I tend not to share, even though I've written about them, because they are still so hurtful to me that I don't want to read them out loud. I've had other poets tell me, oh, but you must, because, you know, it makes other people feel like they're not alone. So sometimes I try to do that. But no, there's absolutely nothing I haven't written about that I know of. I mean, nothing. As far as writing about current events go, I do write about current events, but I have to be very careful about it. Because a current event poem can often be just a current event. And I think a poem needs to be more than that. And it's hard to deal with how to make it do that. So, you know, that's part of it. During the Poet Laureate, since I've been from January, I've written, I think, 7 or 8 current event poems, and it's been very challenging to write commemorative poems for events that are occurring when I am speaking for we rather than I. As Poet Laureate, I feel like I am speaking for we. You know, this is how we felt. Because I don't think that many people in Rockford, frankly, are going to be really interested in my little thoughts. And so I need to make very sure that I'm writing collectively. And so I write a lot about that. I've written, in fact, if you were to go to my official Facebook, you would find several poems on current events. You know, besides After the Coup, which is the one that I read to you, there's several other ones about what we're going through as a nation. I wrote about the inauguration. You know, I wrote about all sorts of things. So yes, I think it's very important. And also social justice poems are very important. And what I try to do, because I can't speak for one group of people, that would be disingenuous of me. So I try to, you know, work in the social context of what I'm doing with lines or two that I hope open up the poem to the social justice.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great question, May. I've got another student who direct messaged me a question. Cassidy asked, and I know this is something a lot of the students in my class are struggling with too. They wondered, how do you get yourself to just like sit down and write? Do you have like a ritual? Do you do anything to get yourself to get writing, or does it just come to you? And she especially would like some advice from as a beginner who is kind of like scared to write or share thoughts about writing.
That's a hard question to answer because I've always had a burning desire to write. And because of my age, I was really not allowed to have that burning desire to write. When I was young people's ages, the thought of any of us, except maybe a few people that were going to the Iowa University program, were really not even given the thought that we might become writers. You know, we might be able to take a, I would say, very, you know, 101 type creative writing class, but it wasn't really with the idea that we were going to become writers. It was really just, well, here's a creative writing class for you to take. What I found is that I had a burning desire to write. And part of it was I was writing with my students and I was writing what they were writing. And I just one day decided that I had to write. It was a passion and I had to do it. And so you're not gonna like this, but I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning and make myself write for an hour before getting ready to go to class. Because at East High, where I was teaching, we had 7:30 classes at that time because we were overcrowded. And so to get ready and all of that. So I made myself do it early in the morning because after teaching 5 classes, there was no way I could possibly have any energy left to write anymore. So when I first started writing, it was a discipline, and I made myself do it. I don't want to say every single day, but maybe 5 days a week, and I made myself do it. And what I found was that the well was deep, and there was so much to write about that I always had something to write about. Half of it was awful. I ended up throwing most of it away. I can be absolutely ruthless. I don't think my work is precious. I'm not particularly sensitive about it, believe it or not, and that helps. So in answer to your question, part of it is getting over the sensitivity. One of the things I really try to do when I give workshops and when I mentor is to make sure that whoever I'm mentoring realizes that we are only talking about craft, that we are not talking about your soul or your ideas or who you are, deep inside of you. We're just talking about how this came across on this piece of paper. And I usually tend to go really gentle on that, which is, all of this is working really well. Would you consider moving this line up? That's the way I think things work best. And that's one of the ways I think I've helped a lot of students get over their fears of writing. As far as speaking goes, that's a whole nother thing. It happened that I was a speech drama minor. So the idea of having to say things out loud has never been particularly bothersome to me. But I happen to know it's the old Jerry Seinfeld joke that, most people would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy over the coffin, because there's a great fear of speaking in front of people. And I don't know the answer to that question except to say that, okay, now I've just had this experience, and all of a sudden that thing stopped. I don't know where that went. I don't know why it stopped. Things happen, but I hope, for example, you're not thinking, oh, what a fool she made of herself because there was a dinging, I'm thinking you'll go on your merry way and think about one or two things I said, and then 3 days from now, it'll be gone. So, it doesn't really help to be particularly sensitive about sharing your work, because I hate to tell you, but not that many people are thinking about your work. I'm sorry to say, they're just not. They're going on with their lives, and you were a couple of minutes of it. And if you can keep that perspective, and that's a perspective I keep also on being rejected, by magazines. It's, yeah, so what? That was 2 minutes of my life. I'm writing somewhere else. So I guess, developing some sort of perspective and thick skin on some of these things help. It's very, very difficult to do, however. I know it's very difficult to do, but it can be done. Just think of it that way. Who's really thinking about your work a week from now? Anyone? And if they are, you must have made a really good impression, and good for you. Wow.
Thank you.
I don't know, did that help at all?
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's certainly been a conversation that has come up over and over again in our class. So I think that was really helpful for everyone to hear. It's really easy to be precious with our words and think that everything we craft is just this carefully blown glass that's going to drop any moment. But really, you could just break it all up and write some new stuff tomorrow and just see what happens.
When I teach my poetry salons, which I haven't this year because of the poetry of this new position, one of the things I start with is you are going to have to get over the idea that anything anyone suggests to you about this work has anything to do with your deeper soul. All it is now is a creation on paper. They don't know your soul. And I make it an absolute habit, as Olivia knows, never to discuss, oh, here's what I think you meant by this. Or I didn't know you were feeling so bad about this. We always look at it just as a creation of craft. And it's like a divorcing in a sense. It's like, it's not in here anymore. It's this other entity. And you almost have to look at it as though it was anonymous, even like you were anonymous. And that has helped me a lot. If I had gone under every time I have been rejected, I wouldn't be anywhere right now. I cannot tell you the number of times I've been rejected. I couldn't even count. It's so many. I mean, if I've been accepted 600 times, and you know what the, if you know the odds, it's like 1 in 100. If you're lucky, or if it's a new place, it might be 1 in 10. Think of the amount of rejection that is. So it's like, okay, this isn't working. But unlike a lot of other people, I will not keep up with them. If they don't like my work right away, I don't like them either. I'm done. I mean, I'm just not going to hang in there because this is the best place on earth to get published. And if you don't get published there, nobody will notice you. Oh, that's nonsense. The only people who care about that are super academics who live in a small world. The world is much bigger than that. And the world of poetry is infinitely bigger than that. And once you realize that, it really, really frees you to do a whole lot of things with your work.
Thanks so much. I know that if you're one of my students or a student in another class, if you have to run off to your next class or need to go to work, I understand. I'm going to stick around a little bit longer for a few other questions. Is that okay with you, Christine? Or do you need to rush off?
Sure.
And I know Kyle actually had a question for you. Kyle, did you want to ask? Go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, sure. I'm currently teaching a class on creative nonfiction. So my students are writing memoirs, they're regularly thinking about their lives. And so much of what you said between your poems reminded me of the things we talk about in that class, about being someone who looks at your life carefully, someone who's looking for metaphors and comparisons. And so I've been trying this whole time to craft a smart sounding question about some of the connections between writing memoir and writing poetry. But part of me is wondering, is there a mindset? Do some people just naturally lean more towards being a memoirist and some people are naturally more poets? Is there more connection than sometimes people think about? What do you think about the connections?
I actually did not set out to be a poet. I wanted to be a fiction writer, and I can write short stories. I cannot write a novel because I can't connect the dots. But what I found is within you, you have to find the certain different kinds of skills that you have that you bring to bear to this genre. Now, if you're a memoir writer, you probably aren't a poet. It's possible you could be, but poets tend to be more oriented towards sound and less oriented towards continuing the narration forever. So the narration has to be compact, if I'm making any sense. But if you want to expand the memoir, it's pretty hard to be thinking about, oh, did I put a nice metaphor in there somewhere? Or let me see, what were the sounds that I put in those? You can't be really thinking about that if you're writing longer pieces. And if that comes more naturally to you, then that's what you should do. It took me a while to figure that out. I didn't know that from the beginning. I didn't actually set out to be a poet. It just happened that I discovered that the things that I could do were the things that poets could do. And especially I was lucky because I knew how to speak, and that helped a lot, So it's you have to find the skill set that you have and kind of go with that. So I mean, I would never tell somebody, well, if you're a poet, you can certainly write a memoir, or if you're a memoirist, you can certainly write a novel, because it's just not true. It's a whole different set of skill sets. Now, there are people who can do it all, but maybe they're 1 in a million. Most of us kind of get in a square where we can, work our magic or whatever within that square. But I don't know if I answered your question exactly. Did you have more to it?
No, that's perfect. I didn't know what the question was anyway. That's really helpful. Thanks.
Okay.
I see Yolandi's got his hand up.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for organizing this event, and I really enjoyed the reading of the poems. My questions maybe is too naive, since we are in a poetry reading, right? But I was wondering about the orality, vocalizing poetry, reading poetry out loud. I come from a country where this is very common and very commonly run, vocalized, by the way. In Cuba, you have a lot of poets, they read poetry everywhere. There are all these kind of events, but they are so grandiloquent, so pompous when they are reading, that they are, at the same time they're reading their own poetry, they are destroying the text. I know, of course, that this is not your case. There is a cadence here. When I was listening to you, there is a rhythm, there is a tempo, personalized tempo, by the way, and I enjoyed that a lot. So I was wondering, what will you say to those authors who read their poetry? How can you work on finding your own tempo and your own personal rhythm?
That is a fascinating question that I could go on and on about. And the reason is that there's so much going on in American poetry and in the world that is more spoken word or more performance oriented than it used to be. There's a whole new genre of spoken and performance poetry, which has as its building blocks more the sound, the punch, the performance of it rather than the subtleties, the slower cadences and all that. Some people might find my work completely boring because I don't get up and show off, and I don't get up and make a big deal about, what I'm doing. For one thing, I'm too old and it would look really stupid if I did. But even if I were younger, I wouldn't have done it. But that is not to say that it doesn't work for other people, because for other people, it's very exciting and they're not listening for the subtleties. They're listening for the pack, they want the impact, they want, and to some people, I'm trying to find you, there you are. It's to some people, and I would agree with you completely, it sounds extremely egotistical and extremely pompous. But for a lot of people, it sounds extremely exciting and vibrant and wonderful. So we can't make judgments about that. We have to sort of accept that there's various kinds of poetry, various kinds of audiences who like different kinds of things. And that's the best way that I could say it. But I have to tell you that I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that you said that, because I do worry about that sometimes. I mean, I do worry about thinking, oh my God, I'm getting to be one of those old fogies that nobody wants to listen to. So thank you for that compliment.
And I totally agree with your arguments, but I insist, what would be your advice to find, I know, and I agree totally with you that there are many ways to read a poem. It can be, strongly, it can be more paused, it can be in different ways. And that is amazing. Everybody can find a different style and it works in different ways. But how you yourself have been working on finding your own way to read poetry? Out loud, I mean, orally.
Well, today it was particularly difficult because I'm sitting in front of a laptop and I don't, want to put things in front of me, and I got my head over on the side and all that. So today it was particularly difficult. But usually I like to stand up, and then you get, a little bit more breath to it as well. But what I try to do in the work itself is to find words that fit together in an interesting way, that are challenging in some cases, or lyrically beautiful in other cases, or what I would call, because I'm a musician, moments of percussion that maybe change, make things a little bit more exciting and change the cadence so that it's not just slow all the time. A lot of it comes from a musical background. And it's kind of hard to explain that if you're not like, if you don't know a lot about music, to say, oh, here come the violins. I know what that means in poetry, but nobody else does, you know, except for the people in my group. Or, oh boy, it's probably time now for a little percussion. We've had quite a few violins here. Let's get a little bit of some interest going here so that we've got some interest in the way this sounds. Or why don't we try using some words together that we had not really tried before? Or how about some repetition in the longer lines so that they sound more like moments of singing almost, rather than moments of just talking. So I try very hard in most of my poems to do all of that. And it's very, very hard work. So to have somebody actually appreciate that part of it and realize that it's not just words that I put in paragraph form and then went down the page with it to make it look like poetry. I'm so glad to find somebody that hears that, because I do try very hard and I work very hard on that.
Thank you very much.
And I do want to say the one thing about spoken word. Spoken word poetry can be absolutely magnificent. If you listen to, of course, Amanda Gorman's inaugural speech. Now, that was virtuoso spoken word poetry. It wasn't just, hey, I'm upset about something, I'm telling you like it is, which is fine, that's fine. But she took so much care to the spoken part of it, but also bringing in some rhyme, but not doggerel and lots of rhyme. She took so much care into doing the history of the country and so much care into the metaphor of the word hill, for example. To me, that was a virtuoso spoken word poem. I wish I could do that.
And we've got one more question, and I think this will be the end of our questions. David?
Hi, just wanted to say hi to Christine. And I wanted to make a comment about, you were talking about the difference between poetry and creative nonfiction. A lot of your poetry about the Northwest is really narrative. I mean, you are doing a creative nonfiction just in a poetry style in there. And I know that you and I are both big fans of John Dixon. And John Dixon started out as a short story writer. He got into the best short stories in 1960, but he said that people liked his poetry more than his short stories. So I think any writer who's writing in different venues, writing in different elements and different types of writing, is eventually going to find his pace, eventually going to find where he belongs. And I think that you found where you belong in poetry. When you work with young poets, you're not saying be a poet when they're really a short story writer. I mean, you just find your normal place to be. Is that how you feel?
About a year to figure that out. I actually took, among my many sabbaticals, I took a sabbatical at Northern Illinois University, and I worked with the poet Lucian Strike, and I worked with a playwright, and I worked with, I think his name was Glenn Miller, but I'm not sure. It's been so long, it was 1984, who was a fiction writer. I worked with all of these people. And you are absolutely right. I found that I could write short fiction. In fact, I won their fiction award. But the other thing that I realized, forgive me, I don't read short fiction. So why am I going to write short fiction? No, there was this moment that I thought, well, what are you talking about? You read novels, but you don't read short fiction. So it seemed sort of disingenuous to think, well, I'm going to be a short story writer when I don't even read short stories. So there was that. I could do that because it was short and I could get to the end of it and I didn't have to connect the dots. Playwriting, I absolutely could not do. I could get the first two acts together, but I could never resolve it in a way that was ever, in any way that I could stand it. So I realized there was just no way I could be a playwright. And then I did write a short novel, and it was, believe it or not, serialized in a funny little magazine out in Sausalito. But it wasn't very good. It just wasn't very good. And one of the main reasons it wasn't very good is I just can't keep the dots straight. It's like, it's just too long and involved, and I don't know where to put this character in the middle of things and to change another character here. It's beyond me. So you are right. It took me a while to figure it out. One of the things that I found out about poetry that I really like is that it's very intense. And I like that. So you can sit down, you've only got an hour in the morning, you better get it done. It's intense, drink your coffee and get it done. I also found that it could include a lot of musical devices that I had been brought up with but didn't realize were part of my psyche. The short fiction really didn't have that going for me. Obviously the novel didn't, you know. And I found that the ability to tell a story, going back to what you said, a narrative, Jonathan Holden in his book, Style and Authenticity and Modern American Poetry, said that the modern American poet is really an intimate narrative conversation. And what I found is I could write intimate narrative conversations. I could not write long, involved conversations. So the combination of being able to put the small amount of narrative in it, the sound devices in it, the intensity in it, and oftentimes, quite frankly, the contrarian mind that I have, because I don't see things normally, helped a lot. Because sometimes in poetry, a lot of poets don't see things the way everybody else sees them. And so this combination sort of worked. And so that's more or less what I stuck with, because that's what I could continue having success with. And that's what I got noticed for. So it just kept feeding for 50 years, plus the teaching. It all got, kind of, it fed into each other, if that makes any sense. And I ended up, as you say, doing sort of what John Dixon did, and realizing that, well, people seem to enjoy the shorter pieces of the narration in the poetry more than they enjoyed the longer pieces. Listen to that. Plus, I was better at it than the longer stuff. So I hope that answers what you were kind of asking or commenting on.
Thank you so much. And what a nice way to kind of.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sorry, I think there was a little bit of lag. I hope I'm not interrupting anyone. I just wanted to say thank you so much. And that was such a great question, I think, to end for the students who are in my class here. We've been reading a lot of kind of genre blending work. So I know like Claudia Rankine, Jenny Booley, Maggie Nelson, Gloria Anzaldúa, and how they're kind of playing with multiple genres within the same text at the same time to kind of play and experiment and see what's working for them, what seems to be the thing that they really identify with and can run with. So I'm hoping all of this conversation helps inform those students who are still in this meeting and thinking about what it is that they want to write moving forward, even after our semester is over with. But thank you so much, Christine. Thank you everyone who stuck around for the end of the reading. I really appreciate everyone's involvement and all the great questions you had.
enjoyable and stimulating. Thank you.
Okay, well, everyone have a great rest of your afternoon, and yeah, enjoy your little mini break if you're in Rockford or Rockford University. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was so nice. I'll follow up tomorrow with the video link and everything else.
Sounds good, Nicole. Thanks for all your help.
Thank you.